Hey, so I have been gone for 3 years. I got myself an education within cultural heritage studies and archaeology. So I'm actually getting my degree now this spring. And I felt like now it's a perfect time to come back and actually do what it was that I wanted to do, which is make cool videos about archaeological finds, runestones, historical places, mythology, you name it. Stuff that has to do with archaeology and history is like way too exciting to leave alone. We need to talk about it. I need to talk about it. So if you have been here since the beginning, I used to upload 3 years ago these Runestone videos that I really enjoyed making, telling the backstory, showing the locations and talking about these things that I find really fascinating. And since then, and since I've gotten an education within these things, I am even more excited to share with you guys, and hopefully this time around with much better quality and much better planning behind it. Some of you might think that 3 years, that's 3 years is a pretty long time, right? Well, I have not only been studying, I have, for example, I have learned an ancient craft where I have learned how to make belts by hand through all of the ancient arts and secrets. I opened up an Etsy where I made these like sick petroglyph shirts and hats that are very comfortable. I've also been to a ton of museum and gotten very inspired and created art inspired by historical figures and mythological figures. So that's something I've been doing as well. I've also been writing and researching a lot of blog post articles for the Valhyr site and for other people who like my writing and my research. I have created a ton of reels for Instagram, and I met some lovely people through both my education and through Instagram. But you know what? Now I'm back, better than ever, and I have my very professional setup here and everything. So I am so excited to be back and talk to you guys about history, mythology, and everything that has to do with Norse and Scandinavian culture. And besides Scandinavian history and mythology, I will also be spicing it up a little bit and put in some Estonian mythology and history in there, because I have literally written my graduation thesis about Estonian cupmark stones. And the thesis, my final thesis that I wrote before that, was also about Estonian history. So I am spicing it up a little bit for you guys. But that's that. I mean, I've been gone for 3 years, now I'm back. Let's go, let's do this. So for my big return, if anyone is still here and anyone is still watching, I want to tell you the story about one of the most fascinating runestones I've come across in Sweden. And if you have any topics to suggest to me, please drop a comment. Let's go. I'm excited. Let's do this. This story has its beginning in another century. The story actually takes place throughout different centuries. The location is a small congregation on the countryside of Western Götaland in Sweden. The congregation's center point is a church built around the year 1100, just after the end of the Viking Age. This is a story of a church, a very brave and involved congregation, and a magical stone with the most peculiar message carved upon its surface. Let's start with the location. Sparlösa is a small Swedish church village with circa 50+ people living there. The church originally was built around the 1100s, and the church you can see here today is a product built during the 1800s. This is due to another historical era in Sweden that one could call the big medieval church demolition era. You see, During the 1800s, the Swedish population had a huge baby boom, and many congregations grew by twice its sizes within such a short while. Farming was also a big chapter of this era, with more modern methods of dealing with crops, which had the effect that tiny villages split up and moved together into bigger clusters, away from the fields. The role of the church then grew even more so as a gathering place. And these medieval churches, they were old and just didn't hold enough space for everyone to fit. Unfortunately, this also led to many of these beautiful medieval churches to be completely destroyed and left in ruins on empty lots. While others, like the Sparlösa one, it was built upon. And the result is this huge type of churches you can see here. Here you can also see how the stone was placed in the medieval church wall during the 1600s, before it was renovated. Placing runestones in church walls is not uncommon during the border between the Viking Age and medieval times either. That is how many of these stones has maintained their good carvings, and some have even contained ancient color samples being preserved and saved from the harsh weather. The church and runestone discussion, it is for the future and for its own video. Let us now move on with this story. The runestone was removed from the church's wall in 1937 with the help of some horsepower and very, very gentle handiwork. It was placed in front of the church instead, in one whole piece. And all of this thanks to an old lady by the nickname Olle-Maja. When she was an old lady, she talked about how there was an old, odd-looking stone in the southern part of the church wall. That wall had since been covered with plaster. Without her directions, this stone might have taken so much longer to take down from this wall. This is sadly the truth with some of the stones in Sparlösa. They have been reported during the 1600s and they have never resurfaced so far. This stone was probably originally found in close proximity to where the church had been built, since it is thought that the place humans used to socialize back in ancient times were roughly around the same areas, even though the stones and buildings has changed. That might also be a factor to why the stone have been built into the church, to keep it on its original place and to include it into society's new traditions. Just a couple of meters from this church is a small yellow building, keeping its treasure safe within. Since the Sparlösa runestone is one of a kind and has been compared to the famous Rök runestone, it was scouted out by the county of Stockholm. Stockholm likes to collect treasures from all around Sweden and put into their collections and museums. The Sparlösa congregation and the whole county was appalled by the idea that this runestone would be taken away from its original place, and they put up a good fight against the suggestion of moving the stone. Since this had been the case for another stone with a similar message carved upon it not too far away from Sparlösa, the Noleby stone. In order to keep the Sparlösa runestone in its original place, a house was built by the locals with help of the county. All of this happened after the fact that the stone had already been shipped away to Stockholm for around 1.5 years. There is even a quote made by one of the locals that goes, "I don't know what would happen if we were not to get it back. Probably the townspeople would get out of their houses and actually collect it themselves." The locals partook in radio. They had meetings with the National Heritage Board of Sweden, all in order to keep the possibility to get their beloved stone back to its home. Finally, when everything had been decided, the stone came home in 1982, and it was placed to its current location, and the house was finally built around it. Now let us take a look at the actual masterpiece that is this runestone. It is truly one of a kind. Just as the Rök runestone, it is believed to have been carved somewhere during the 800s. There is 30 different types of runes on the Sparlösa runestone, where 3 of them are of elder footark. Many experts have traveled wide and far in order to break the code and to try to understand what this wonderful stone actually says. A part of what the actual imagery on the stone says might have been lost to time, since our understanding of these ancient motifs are limited, whilst they might be perfectly clear to someone from the 800s AD. One might read into the images that they're telling parts of a saga. Let's go through it side by side. Then look at a possible translation and interpretation. Let's look at the first side. Öjuls, son of Erik, also gave Alrik. These are some of the largest runes in Sweden on a runestone. They are around 50 centimeters tall, some of them. The carving clearly talks about the shift of mansions, village ruling or land. Scholars have interpreted the size of the runes as showing that these names are important. There is a tradition to write the names of rulers bigger than the other text of a document. This tradition is tied to, and I'm sorry if my pronunciation is bad, Merovingian king dynasty lists. The Merovingian dynasty was the ruling family of the Franks from the middle of the 400s until the middle of the 700s AD. Sparlösa is, however, a long way away from Western Europe, so I do not know how much this theory holds water. Carving with larger runes can point to importance, with or without the king's lists. At the bottom of the stone, a man can be spotted, holding up the whole imagery. Scholars have interpreted him as Thor. Others believe it is Alrik himself holding the carving up. And if you look closely, you will also notice the super small runes running across the side. This carving is from around the year 1000 AD. And this is made by some opportunist that wants to honor someone without financing their own stone. These someones are Gisle and Gunnar. Gisle made the carving to their brother Gunnar, which is absolutely a nice gesture of Gisle. I guess you have to take whatever you have available to you. Let's move on to the second side. This side of the stone is a very fascinating sight and the most memorable for those visiting the stone. There is a large 3-dimensional carving of an owl creature, or maybe possibly an eagle. Some call it a dragon or a lion, but I think that's a stretch. It looks very owlish to me, with the legs, the lifted wings, just as owls look when catching their prey. Underneath the creature, it looks to be a crane, which is interesting. Not too far from Sparlösa is a place called Hornborgasjön, and each year thousands of cranes makes a pit stop there every spring. And there's many thousands of them. It has even turned into a tourist attraction by now. Since cranes are mentioned even as early as during the 300s BC by Aristoteles, these birds have been around for a while. And who knows, for how long their flying patterns have been similar to today's birds. In between the owl creature and the crane is a serpent-like shape. Maybe there is a mythological tale that involves these three main elements that has fallen into a natural human amnesia due to time. The very interesting runes surrounding this image are telling us so that Sigmar the Victorious is named or called son of Erik, big battle to Öjuls, which could mean that this memorial is for Öjuls. And interpret the runes here, descended from the gods, carved by Alrik Lubir. So here is where we will talk a little bit more about the Noleby runestone. The Noleby runestone was also found around this area. The Noleby runestone does also talk about how runes are descended from the gods. If the Sparlösa runestone is talking about the runes as given by the gods, or if it is the family members that are descendants of the gods, might be up for debate. But in how the runes are following each other, one might be inclined to put more emphasis on the theory that it is the runes themselves that are descended from the gods. And this translation also fits more together with the translation of the Noleby stone, and also with the Havamal. And this way of thinking is also something that has occurred in other times. The notion that reading is something that you can be handed by gods. You have to be the chosen one. You have to be a king or nobleman to be able to read. Now, are you ready for side 3? This is a good one, but there's no runes. There sure is imagery though. And here everything is absolutely up for interpretation and discussion, even though we are clearly looking at a house of some sort. Maybe a longhouse, a hall, maybe Valhalla or any other of the gods' halls. Maybe it's just a destination, since this side of the stone seems to be telling a story of traveling. It does resemble other halls that can be seen on stones, where also Odin is depicted. Exactly which hall this is meant to resemble is impossible for us to tell. Underneath this we see a ship, typical for the Viking age, with its shapes and sails and oar holes on its sides. Is this a symbolic ship or an actual ship that has been used for a real-life journey? Underneath the ship we see a left-handed rider wearing a helmet, followed by a dog, or maybe a deer, maybe something completely else. Who this mysterious rider is, we have no idea. It seems, however, to be a very personal depiction, since the helmet is depicted with all of its shapes very specifically, as well as the fact that he is holding the sword in his left hand. Maybe this is Öjuls himself. There is also more birds showing on top of the ship, and some dragon, wolf, lion looking thing on this side as well. It's absolutely beautiful. Let's move on to the last side, side 4. The fourth side is very mysterious as well, since it has gotten severely damaged. On the top is what looks like a part of a mask. In Sweden we call these terror masks, and it's believed to have scared people away from destroying the carvings. Maybe it is a portrait or part of the story depicted on the stone. The runes have been translated to say, "Gave in return, then the father was seated in Uppsala, the father who, days and nights, Alrik did not fear, not Öjuls." One interpretation of this part of the carving is that Öjuls' father Erik had influence in Old Uppsala, where the name Erik was a common one within the bloodline of kings. This is something that is written down in Snorri's Ynglinga saga, where also the name Alrik occurs as a king's name in relation to Uppsala. What is curious is that these names are not as common in the Iron Age part of Västergötland, where this stone can be found today. This stone is truly something else. In order to decode it completely, we would probably need time traveling. Until then, I guess we just have to wonder. Thank you for following me along to this beautiful place. And if you have any other places or topics you'd like me to cover, don't be shy in the comments. Until next time, moose out.